Hi, this is the next of these kind of practical skill videos, and this is on squeezes and squeeze making. Obviously, squeeze making is something that we're going to do as part of the practical part of the current workshop. If you're an in-person participant of the April 2022 workshop at the ICS, then you'll get a chance to do it in a hands-on way. If you're one of the remote participants, we can't necessarily replicate this. But I wanted to give some background if you are able to try squeeze making, or if you are coming across squeezes in a university collection or a museum collection, it can be really helpful to know how they're made and what they can be used for. So first of all, what is a squeeze? A squeeze is an impression of an inscription, and it's usually going to be made using acid-free filter paper. Occasionally you get some made using latex. This became a technique that was in use during the 20th century. However, latex squeezes are a lot less durable than paper ones. We have collections of paper squeezes that have survived from the mid-19th century, right? They're basically not indestructible because obviously you can rip them or burn them or get them wet or whatever. But they're as durable as a paper book. You know, they can last for well over 100 years. Latex ones tend to degrade eventually and become crumbly. So that was a technique that was available. It's less popular than the straightforward paper technique. So I'm only going to dwell on the paper squeeze technique in this video. How you make a squeeze is you apply wet paper to the inscription that's been made wet, preferably with distilled water, but any water is okay. And then it's hit into place with a horsehair brush. I'm going to provide a link to a video of someone actually doing this. It's a video made by another organisation. It's an external video, but it's a really good demonstration of how this is actually done. And then when it's dry, the paper can be just peeled away and removed and stored. So it's a really, really helpful technique for lots of reasons. It's fairly straightforward to do. The materials to do it are reasonably inexpensive, and it has a lot of applications. Before we go into why squeezes are so useful, I just want to show a couple of examples. So this is a squeeze from the University of British Columbia online collection. There's a lot of squeeze collections around the world, and a lot of them are now being digitized. So if you look for a picture of an inscription online, you may well find a picture of the squeeze as much as find a picture of the inscription. So this is what the right side of a squeeze will look like, if you like. So this is where the paper has been pushed into the inscription. You've got all the indentations, not just of the lettering, but of the stone itself and of the edges of the stone as well. And that's really important when you make a squeeze to go all the way up to the edge, so you capture the shape of the stone and any letters that are kind of broken right at the edge, which you can see is happening here. Just to kind of highlight as well, looking at a different squeeze from another collection, it doesn't have to be just lettering that you make a squeeze of. Anything with any kind of decoration or iconography, you can make a squeeze as well. That being said, it's really only appropriate to things that are quite low relief, because the paper can only stretch so far. It can bend, but if you try and stretch it too far, it will tear and break. So even very deep lettering can be a problem. But kind of lettering of a normal depth and relatively low relief decoration can all be captured. So what's great about squeezes is they're capturing not just the text of the inscription, but something about the surface of the inscription as well, the edges, any damage, all these things. And when you make a squeeze, you end up with, a right side that's kind of read from left to right. But what is often even more useful is the wrong side, where you get the indentations. And generally speaking, people will photograph or read the wrong side because it gives you a lot of extra detail and it's actually much easier to read. So something that happens a lot now is people photograph the kind of wrong side and then flip the photo. And this gives you the ability to read things that are not always visible. If you're just looking straight at the inscription, it gives you an idea of the depth of different marks as well. Makes it much easier to tell what is damage and what is deliberate. makes it much easier to use a raking light, as we were talking about in another video, because everything is kind of raised from the surface. So that's something that is really common. So you'll sometimes see a flipped image of the reverse rather than the kind of right side of the inscription. People are sometimes interested in what the correct brush is. If you look at the external video that I'll link, you'll see one in action. If you're coming in person to the workshop, hopefully I'm going to be able to borrow one. But there is a kind of vaguely agreed format of a squeeze brush. If you see a specialist squeeze brush, it will have a kind of similar shape. It has these quite closely packed bristles, normally made from horsehair, and on a wooden handle, and the handle is often slightly curved so that when you're hitting the stone with it, you don't hit your knuckles on the stone. A lot of them are curved at the top and straight across at the bottom, and that allows you to get into lots of different shaped corners, stuff like that. But basically, any closely packed brush that's made of natural material and is not going to rip the paper will probably do. So what are some of the advantages of squeezes? There's lots, and there's a reason why it's a really popular epigraphic activity and part of epigraphic study, and has been for a long time, since probably the 1840s or even earlier. So one reason it's really popular and has been for a long time is that multiple copies can be made for study. So many different universities now have collections that include lots and lots of inscriptions from IG1. Those inscriptions only exist in one place, but the copies of them can exist in lots and lots of places. And this was hugely advantageous in the days before photography was widely accessible. But even now, that can be a huge advantage, because you can study something about the physical form of the inscription just in a paper form, and it has a lot of advantages over just a photograph. As we've been talking about, a lot of places are now also digitizing their squeeze collections, which is a huge advantage. You can look at them with raking light. People can disseminate different inscriptions, very widely. Some things might only have been squeezed once or twice, and some have been done much more commonly. But it means we can have multiple copies of the same inscription available. You don't have to go to where the physical inscription is in order to be able to study it in detail. They're very lightweight and easy to transport. So it's really easy to be out in the field, whether that's in Greece or Egypt or somewhere else, and make squeezes and transport them back to your university. As part of that, they can also be rolled up and sent in the post. This is part of why the latex thing never caught on. Partly it degrades, but partly it's just not the same level of usefulness. The paper squeezes, although you need to be a little bit delicate with them, you can roll them up, put them in a postal tube, and send them like you would post, a poster or a large, large package or whatever. You don't want to fold them, but you can roll them up, and then they're perfectly good when they get to their destination. So people can send them from places in the field to their home or their home institutions, and this is why places all over the world have squeeze collections. Also leading on from that, many thousands of squeezes can be stored in a small space. In some collections, you can see specialist squeeze cabinets, which have very kind of shallow drawers, lots and lots and lots of shallow drawers to fit all the squeezes in. It's obviously way easier to store these paper copies than it is to store stones or even plaster casts of stones. So it means that lots of universities can have quite large collections available for study. Leading on from the kind of multiple copies thing, the use of squeezes really preserves inscriptions which might be lost or damaged. So some inscriptions are now only known from squeezes. So squeezes were made in the 19th century of things that were then destroyed, perhaps during the Second World War. It means that we still have a physical copy of that inscription. So that's hugely important. Even if things are not fully destroyed, a lot of inscriptions are still out in the elements, and they wear down over time with rain and sun and all this kind of thing. So having a copy of how something was previously can be really, really important. As we were saying as well, the reverse can sometimes be read more easily, particularly for very small details or where there are areas of damage. So it might be easier to read a squeeze than to read the inscription itself, particularly with being able to photograph it and manipulate the photograph, things like that. So there's loads and loads of advantages to using squeezes, some of which make them even more convenient than reading an inscription in situ. So this is why everyone likes to make squeezes. And this is why they're useful. And even if you never end up making any, these are reasons why you might want to visit a collection that includes squeezes. So I'm just going to share a few photos, again, from Exeter Cathedral, from a workshop from a few years ago, just to show you a couple of stages of people actually doing this in situ. As I said, I'll link an external video which will give you a better idea of the process. But you can see here, this is how we might do something that's in the floor. These were some very large grave slabs. This is my colleague Charlotte Tupman of Exeter working with one of the master's students. And you'll see that they've got the wet paper and they've got a spray bottle of water to kind of wet it down. And what they're doing there is they're rolling it very carefully onto the floor. What you have to do with the squeeze paper is make sure there's no air bubbles underneath that will distort your picture. And that's really, really difficult to do. So it's something that takes a bit of practice, but you end up laying the paper down very, very carefully onto the kind of wettened surface. As you'll see as well, for larger pieces, you can overlap the squeeze paper. That's completely fine. That won't cause any problems for your final image. For if you had a smaller piece, you would cut the squeeze paper more or less to size to take in the edge of the inscription as well. But you would cut it down. For larger pieces, you can overlap the piece of paper, no problem. This is another image of, you can see you've got a tray of water for dipping the paper in before we put it on. We've got a spray bottle of water for spraying the stone. And the students are once again trying to roll the paper out flat on the floor without getting bubbles underneath, which is really, really difficult. The squeeze brush is also sitting just on the right of the image there so you can see it. And then finally, this is one of the students actually having a go at doing the squeeze. So you have to hit vertically with as little kind of horizontal movement as possible. Horizontal movement will end up tearing the wet paper and causing holes. So you want to hit it in. Then you might be able to see to the right of the image, so on the student's kind of left-hand side, there's a part of the squeeze that's already been done. So you can see how the paper's been kind of hit into the inscription. If we have a chance to do this in person, you'll see what I mean. But these are kind of some of the tips for doing it. You can overlap the paper. The really key thing is to get as few air bubbles as possible and to hit the paper as vertically as possible. And when you hit it in the right way, it makes a very satisfying thwack kind of sound. So we'll look forward to giving that a try in London.